All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Um, Again, hello, welcome to EIHR's 2024-2025 webinar series, Human Rights in the Arts, Resistance, Activism, Healing. I am Kim Klett, the Deputy Director of the Educators Institute for Human Rights. If you haven't already, feel free to put where you are joining us from in the chat box. So first, I would like to tell you a little bit about EIHR. Taking lessons from the Holocaust and other historic human rights violations, EIHR develops teaching materials, convenes training workshops and summits, and supports educator networks to give secondary students a deeper understanding of how egregious conflicts arise and evolve, how justice is served, and most importantly, how we can prevent future atrocities. We bring these programs to you free of charge and are happy to do so, but do appreciate any donations you might be able to provide. And if you would like to make a donation to help cover costs for our webinars and support our other programs, please go to the link that Colleen is putting in the chat box. Also, please visit our website. We're at www.eihr.org to find our many resources. This year's theme for our webinar series was chosen by our viewers. Soon we'll be putting out a poll to gauge your interest for the next series. For this one, we think about the arts being such an important part of our lives, no matter what might be happening in the world, which is a crazy place. Think about the way that art can transform our emotions and our thinking, how we can use art to share our voices and ideas, and how it can act as a form of resistance when we are oppressed or mistreated. We have one more artist. Our final webinar will be April 6th, which is just a few weeks away. And we hope that you'll join us for a conversation with community artist Vanessa German, who has been featured in the New York Times. And Colleen is dropping the link for next month's webinar if you want to register for that. We'd love to see you then. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land where EIHR's office resides. EIHR respectfully acknowledges the Piscataway and Nanko-Chenk or Anacostan people and the elders, both past and present, throughout the generations who have stewarded the land where EIHR gathers. As you listen today, please feel free to drop questions into the chat box. We'll take questions at the end, but if you have a pressing question as Rebecca's presenting, please feel free to put that in. We also will send a follow-up email with the recording of the program, as well as any resources that are mentioned. And remember, you can watch past webinars on EIHR's YouTube channel, and that link will also be in the chat box. So now I would like to introduce today's guest, Rebecca Davis. Rebecca is the founder and executive director of MindLeaps, a not-for-profit organization advancing the education of vulnerable children around the world through the creative arts. MindLeaps has 103 staff members working in 6 different countries and is headquartered in New York City. Prior to MindLeaps, Rebecca worked for the Carter Center, Stage Holding Russia, and Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. In Philadelphia, she ran a professional dance company and a pre-professional training program for 5 years that produced 6 full-length original narrative works: Antigone, Helen Keller, Darfur, Greed, The Tale of Enron, Van Gogh, and Braving the New World. Rebecca graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelors of Business Administration in Entrepreneurship from Temple University, and she holds a master's in International Relations with a concentration in Peacekeeping from American Military University. She received a postgraduate certificate in Ballet and Choreography Studies during her Fulbright year in Russia. In 2012, she received a second Fulbright scholarship to lead American dance studies in Crimea, shortly before it was annexed to Russia. In her role as executive director at MindLeaps, Rebecca is frequently asked to speak about the use of data analytics to measure outcomes in the performing arts and the journey of an entrepreneur to build an organization working on multiple continents. She has spoken at the World Bank's Human Development Week, the annual conference of the Fulbright Alumni Association, the opening plenary of Segal Family Foundation, and at various universities. In 2023, Rebecca won the Women's Empowerment Award from the United Nations Federal Credit Union Foundation, and I would say that's well deserved. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your being here, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you to the Institute for the opportunity to be a part of this series. I'm very much enjoying the time that we'll be spending together today. So I'll share a few slides. And today we'll be focusing on, as Kim said, the connection between arts and human rights. And the way I look at this topic is the promotion of one and the other together. I think sometimes we think of the arts as a tool or the human rights as a platform, but actually I think if we look at 4 different pillars today, we can really see how one forms the other and both help one another. Art as a tool for human rights is something that's kind of said frequently these days. And I think we can kind of dig into what exactly that means. And we know that the human rights, especially in today's society, when we look across the world, and for those of us who are Americans, we look at home, we know that the promotion of human rights is something that we can never take for granted. And it is a constant global fight to make sure that we secure those rights and promote those rights for everyone. And those who are voiceless in this battle need it even more. And art is actually a tool that can be used to help that fight and to help that cause. I'll speak at length at some of the examples that we use at MindLeaps and in my previous company, Rebecca Davis Dance Company. But specifically here in this photo that we see here, you see 2 like amazing young students leaping up and doing this very difficult jump. And you might not know that these are students who actually don't have access to education before they join the MindLeaps program. This happens to be a photo taken in Guinea-Conakry in West Africa. But unfortunately, this photo could be in many different countries and many different communities around the world, where we still face over 260 million children around the world who are out of school. And as I say, vice versa, it works both ways in my mind. Human rights is also an avenue for artists. It's a place for artists to find their cause and their meaning seen and heard and felt and experienced on different platforms. This photo is taken from Ubuntu Arts Festival. Ubuntu means humanity in Kinyarwanda, the language of Rwanda. And it's an arts festival that takes place every year in Kigali, Rwanda in July. And it marks the end of the 100-day period, which was the most intensive killing period during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And festival organizer Hope Azeda and her company Mashirika bring together artists from around the world every year on this festival to present different works that celebrate humanity and take a moment to reflect on the status of human rights today around the world. This is also a group of MindLeaps students, and actually some of our friends who are joining today know the choreographer very well, Kervin Duthat Boyd, and many of our artists have participated in this festival, but it is a gathering internationally that's held in Kigali, Rwanda. So today, a lot of my examples look at dance specifically. That is my area of knowledge. The arts are powerful in all different ways. Dance is somewhat unique insofar as it usually doesn't rely on a language barrier or verbal communication to be seen and felt and heard by different communities everywhere. So it has a particularly powerful presence, I think. My first company, RDDC, Rebecca Davis Dance Company, was based in Philadelphia and looked at a training program for young dancers, but professional work with professional dancers that was performed on stages on the East Coast in the United States. And the company that I'm running right now, MindLeaps, looks at dance in a very different way. It looks at dance as a way to provide access and opportunity for at-risk youth in underserved communities. So with both of these experiences, we're able to find a lot of different examples of how the arts and specifically dance intertwine with human rights. So as I mentioned, we'll kind of look at like 4 different pillars or 4 different ways of approaching this connection between human rights and the arts. And the first is raising awareness. Again, something I think we kind of all inherently know about the arts is that it's a powerful way to raise awareness about certain issues. But when we kind of think about, you know, what does that look like in practice? Or if you were working with students and you said, okay, use the arts to raise awareness, how would you actually start that approach? I'll give one example from my dance company, RDDC. and how this particular production came to fruition. Because I was not intentionally planning to use dance as a way to communicate about, at that time, the genocide that was happening in Darfur. That was before Sudan and South Sudan split, and before the new atrocities that both of those independent states now face, especially Sudan. Some people are quoting now that Sudan is actually the largest humanitarian crisis around the world currently. So here I was as a choreographer and somebody who loved dance and was working as a choreographer with my dance company in Philadelphia. And I picked up the newspaper one day and I read a Nick Kristof article about what was considered a genocide in Darfur. And kind of quite ignorant of me to reflect back on it, but at that time I didn't even know what the word Darfur was. I didn't know that it was a western part of that country at that time, again, Sudan. But I actually was kind of thinking, like, I think this is like fake news, to be honest. I read this article thinking, I don't really think that that's possible today. We've learned our lesson as we look back on history about genocide and mass atrocities. We've created institutions like the United Nations to protect these rights. I just, like, to be honest, I didn't really believe it, but it was Christoph, so you think, it's got to be true. And in that article, he referenced a book called The Devil Came on Horseback by Brian Steidel. So I went and I got a copy of the book, trying to figure out, like, is this news article true or not? And as I read this book, I just became enthralled and shocked at what I was reading and the truth behind this atrocity. Brian Steidel was an American US Marine who was stationed with the African Union in Darfur. And essentially, just as the title of his book says, he was responsible for recording the genocidal activities that were happening. And his mandate was limited to that. He was not allowed to intervene. So this brings up all of those issues around the right to protect. And his book is really an outcry to the world that we cannot experience mass atrocities and not speak out on them. And I would call the book really a work of art in and of itself. But the way it connected back to me is it made me just kind of open my eyes to what the world can be if we don't give voice to these issues and if we don't understand ourselves what's happening. And so that inspired me to adapt this book into what became a contemporary ballet called Darfur that was performed in Philadelphia, New York, and some of us joining today were actually dancers in this production. And the purpose was to raise awareness about the situation in Darfur. And it did that. People who came to the theater to watch a contemporary ballet work were leaving Googling Darfur and trying to figure out what's happening in our world today and what role do I have to play in promoting this cause and trying to help other people. So again, if I was putting myself in kind of in the shoes of a teacher and thinking, if a student came to me and said, like, what am I supposed to do to use the art to raise awareness? I would suggest to them kind of these three ideas to help spark their thinking. Often it's already inside us how we can speak out, but sometimes we want to understand what are all these connections that allow us to tap into our internal talent. And one is really understanding that we can translate information that we're receiving. It might be from the news, it might be social media, it might be things you're overhearing, it might be something your teacher is telling you. And you can use the arts to then make it into something tangible. It can become a picture, it can become a book, it can become a song, it can become a poem, it can become a dance. All of this information can take shape through the arts. And that thing that you produce, that tangible piece of artwork, then is able to raise awareness about that issue to a broader group of people that experience your art. And the arts are so powerful at making things emotional, right? You can read a book and be deeply affected, as I was when I read The Devil Came on Horseback. You can watch a dance production and remember how you felt when you watched those dancers on stage. Probably all of you sitting here right now can remember, like, a song that makes you feel happy or makes you think about someone. Creating these emotional connections make the art strong and vibrant and powerful. And then often it can create an impression or a memory, something that after the art is over, maybe even after the issue that was expressed through the art is over resolved, let's hope resolved in a positive way, you still hang on to that memory or that moment when you felt something. And that has an ability to make it more sustainable and more long-term and more long-lasting. All of those are really powerful effects that the arts can bring to our work to promote human rights. These are just two examples. I don't know actually either of these causes personally, but I wanted to just remind us that for the artists to use their platforms and be powerful communicators on human rights and raise awareness, the barrier to entry is quite low. You know, these are people, organizations, groups that have set up Instagram accounts and are already raising awareness through whoever is in their network to start to really fight for causes that are important to them. You know, sometimes we think, oh, you have to be a part of a big organization or you have to have a degree in this. But even students today, you know, students in a regular high school anywhere in the world can find a way to connect issues that are important to them to a way that they can voice it through their passion for the arts. So if I was looking once again at this idea of raising awareness, I would say that, you know, raising awareness serves as an entry point for people to be involved. Okay? And that's how it helps the promotion of human rights. And at the same time, raising awareness gives a significance to the art and exposes artists' art to new audiences. And that, in my mind, also helps the artist by giving them this like weight for the work that they're creating and a greater exposure to what they've done. So now if I move on to kind of the second pillar of our conversation, we can also think about the arts as a way to protest, a form of protest, and often a very eloquent and beautiful way to protest some of the worst atrocities that are taking place around the world. And I'll use another example here from RDDC, the stamps company in Philadelphia. This is an image, and I wonder, some of you might even guess kind of the connection by looking at the image. This work, this was another contemporary ballet work that we produced, was inspired by the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And the ballet was called Braving the New World, almost exactly the same. And so for those of you who know the book, you'll recognize immediately kind of the connections here. For those of you who might not have read Huxley's book, the concept is basically, how do we create a uniform society where individuality doesn't exist? Everything is absolute unity. And the thinking behind that is then that that's the perfect society, and then there's never any issues, there's never conflict, there's never problems. Everyone is eternally happy because there is no diversity. This is the thinking in that premise. And so to create this uniform society, human beings are created out of test tubes and were created to be identical. And so this is the opening of the ballet, Braving the New World, where the dancers are representing the human beings who are being born out of these test tubes, and they're absolutely identical. And then if you see up here, this character, and also present here in this image here, let me skip back for one, this image here, there's always this power dynamic, right? We can imagine that this, equal society where it's artificially equal, is perfect, but somebody is pulling the puppet strings, right? Somebody is designing this, somebody is manipulating the environment to create that. It's not happening naturally. So there may be a dictator or this kind of force that's causing that. And in our ballet, this is represented by this character who really controls absolutely everything, this absolute power. And then, the ballet and the book both explore the idea of the individual. So if one of those test tubes didn't go quite right, and you actually ended up with an independent thinker, somebody who was not uniform to the society and could see what we are losing by making everyone think the same and believe the same and not allowing that diversity to grow, okay, what are we losing? Okay? And that ability to feel both positive and negative, but in this uniform environment, how do we kind of fight for that individualism to come up again? And that was represented by this character here in the ballet. And all of those are themes that we're seeing right now across countries as we look at different democracies who are struggling with the exact idea of individualism and how to promote that. So in this case, our production, Braving the New World, and the book itself are really talking about how an individual can protest, a regime. How an individual can say the direction that we're taking is not the direction that we should be taking, or at the minimum raise the questions like, can we think about this? Can we talk about this again? Uh, and that, I think, what's so powerful about the arts in some of these most difficult environments is that like art can still survive underneath oppression, which is like unfortunately not a good thing, but it's possible. There is really no way that you can take away the freedom of speech through art. There's a way that that picture can be drawn, a cartoon can be made, a song can be written. When it seems like all of the other typical tools for opposition to be voiced or taken away, you can't really take away art. And for that very reason, it can actually thrive under suppression, not something that we want it to do, but something that it has the power to do. Really understanding how powerful the arts can be in very difficult circumstances. And then because it can survive and even thrive, it has an ability to keep the opposition alive, to keep the resistance going if it's really, really harnessed. I believe we have some friends joining today from Bosnia and Herzegovina, so these these examples will resonate highly with you. But if we kind of look at, there's many, many, many examples of this, but two famous ones are the Sarajevo War Theater from 1992 to 1995. It was the Bosnian Wars in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina today. And Sarajevo, as many of you know, has the record of being the capital city under the longest siege in modern history, under siege for 4 years. And despite that terrible war hitting the city, the Sarajevo War Theater was operational during that entire time, which is just remarkable to think a theater could be operating when the city was under siege. And it was considered such a kind of a hallmark, a staple of the ability for the city and the people to survive. And both before that particular war and after, there's a famous festival that takes place in Sarajevo every year in Bosnia and Herzegovina called MES. And it's known as a place for international experimental art that is really kind of raising questions about the status of the world and asking us to think and reflect about where we are. It really brings that type of theater to performance and is well attended every year. So again, if we kind of think back on this idea of how are the arts a form of protest and how does that promote human rights, we can really see that it prevents the abuse of human rights from just becoming invisible, right? The art somehow finds a way to still have its voice, to still get through that pushback, that suppression of those human rights. And vice versa, again, I think it's mutually beneficial for the artist and the arts. Is there's like this meeting place, even if it's not like a physical meeting place, there's this meeting place that forms when there is this need to protest. And that's where artists gravitate, and that's where they find a place to really be held and be seen in this fight in their environments. Connected to this, we have this beautiful young trainer. Her name is Juliet, that you see pictured here. Juliet is a young Congolese woman who works for MindLeaps, the company that I run today. And she currently lives in Uganda in Urachinga refugee settlement. Some of our friends joining today know Juliet very well. She always has that smile. And Juliet fled the war in DRC, in Democratic Republic of Congo. She was not able to complete her education and landed in Uganda. Different languages are spoken, couldn't get back into school, has to start to rebuild her life as a teenage girl. And she found MindLeaps. And in this refugee settlement, MindLeaps runs a dance program where children can just join the program. There's no thresholds, no requirements, you just join the dance program. But we needed to train local people to become the dance teachers, the dance trainers, to run the program on a regular basis in this refugee settlement. So Juliet joined our training program and eventually was hired by MindLeaps to be one of the dance teachers here in this community, running this program for other Congolese refugee children. And now she works for MindLeaps. With that money, she's put herself back in school. She's continuing her education. And it's a very simple example of how this job of being a dance teacher has given her an avenue back into all of her human rights. You know, now she's a leader in the community, she has an income, she has her education. And all it is like creating a little door, a little opportunity for her to get back on track and hopefully surpass even what she would have become before. And then if we had a debate going, there would be a second side to this, which is like, are the arts used as a form of protest, or are they used to perpetuate propaganda? And unfortunately, there's many examples of that too. We can talk about dance being a voice to really, as we saw with the Braving the New World, to really show, actually there's this room for these human rights, for the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech. And we can also see in this picture here, which depicts one of the famous Chinese ballets, where we're talking about submission, uniformity, following the rules. And it can be also used, unfortunately, at the same time to promote exactly the opposite of what Braving the World was promoting through individualism. Another really famous example, just to appreciate the complexity of propaganda versus protest, is the famous ballet Spartacus. Spartacus in many ways is considered a metaphor for the early uprisings against the Russian Tsar in the era of Lenin and Trotsky, where it was encouraged to rise up against the wealthy, rise up against the regime. And that's how the ballet was created, and that was the goal of it, really, to say, we should fight against these governing forces that limit our freedom and our powers of economic advancement. And then of course, if we like run that history all the way down, then we end up with Lenin and Trotsky and then Stalin. And then there's like the contrary conversation as to whether or not that's good or bad for society. So questions that are larger than what we'll answer today, but let's move on to our third pillar, which really talks about giving voice to the voiceless. And for me, this gets kind of closer and closer to the work that MindLeaps is doing today, and really what I think is one of the very important ways to look at the arts. So I'm going to play a really short video here of all of the professional dance that we're speaking about today, and all of the tremendous art that's created. This example is not about dance technique or professional art. This is just a group of children sharing one of their dances. We'll just play it for a few seconds. So you can see these kids gathered here. They're getting ready for a performance of their little dance on stage.
Yeah.
You can hear the audience cheering them on.
Yes, Mariah. Aye.
And this is a group of kids in Brooklyn, New York City. You see them working on those moves.
Yes, Ezekiel.
Almost everyone is turning the right way.
Yes, Brian.
Okay, so you get a sense of these kids showing off their moves. And it's wonderful, right? It's wonderful to see these kids expressing themselves. And I hope that when you watch that video, you see kids trying, you see kids doing the best with what they have, and kids really having a place in this performance. And I hope what you don't see is the reality of that particular performance, which is that these are children affected by parental incarceration. So they are students that attend a program run by Children of Promise in New York City. And all the children who go to Children of Promise are affected, their parents are affected by incarceration. So MindLeaps runs a program in connection with Children of Promise, and some of our kids, when they come into dance class, like, they don't know who's going to pick them up that day. They don't know who's at home. There is a huge level of uncertainty with what they're trying to manage every day. And the most important people of their lives come in and out without them knowing when or why or how. And still they're kind of expected to just thrive without an appreciation for the circumstances these young children are being forced to deal with. So there's the whole element there about the question of human rights and mass incarceration, but there's also the impact that we see directly on the voiceless. These are not the kids who can really advocate for a reform of the criminal justice system, but they are the ones affected by it. So what was also really interesting is that was a MindLeaps group of kids that were performing that dance. And those of us who are part of the program, dance teachers or connected to MindLeaps, we were of course going to like celebrate our kids and hear us cheering in the audience. But when that performance happened, there was no parents in the audience. It was only either school teachers or coaches, or in our case, like their dance teachers. There was no parents in the audience for those kids. So this is again kind of where we need to understand like the arts are a necessity, right? This gives a way for these kids to have a voice. It gives a way for people to cheer these kids on in a way that they should be seen and appreciated as totally like any regular kid. And I think if we can really think of all of the examples that we know of, kids singing, kids dancing, kids doing their own little theater sketch that they're sharing with you, it really allows all of these people who might not be seen and heard to have a way to be themselves and to be heard through kind of the guise of the arts. So for the promotion of human rights, giving voice to the voiceless brings forth more voices and a diversity of voices, and the voices that are otherwise not heard to be a part of the efforts to protect our human rights. And for the artist or the artists or the young children, they're visible, and they have a spot on the stage, and that spot is for them to take. And then here, this is one of my favorite photos from MindLeaps. This is one of our trainers in Mauritania in West Africa. And Mauritania has had a long and troubled history. And it literally is in a desert, as you see. And this is one of our dance teachers. And again, here she has a place where she can be herself, where she can be seen, and where she can be really applauded for all of her talents. And I have one more example here of kind of giving voice to the voiceless. So let me play this short little video. So this is a dance party that's happening in Guinea, West Africa. And I'll ask you to kind of just notice this guy here, this white guy with the blue top, who's dancing with all the kids. He's got this move going on. I know some of our team members today recognize this video. So first, let me tell you who's having the dance party. All of these kids are part of the MindLeaps program in Guinea, West Africa, in the capital city of Conakry. And the MindLeaps program there is positioned to help children who don't have access to education come into our program through dance, through this very easy program to get access to and feel powerful and develop your soft skills. And then once these kids start to have structure and order to their lives, then we help to get them into formal education so they can graduate eventually from high school. So these are generally kids who are out of school. Some of them have now made the transition to start school, but this is who's doing the dance party. And this here is another person in the dance party, and he is the US ambassador. This is Ambassador Fitrel, who's stationed in Guinea. And I love this video because what it shows you is that dance equalizes and the arts equalize everyone. So here you have some children who really are fighting to have any of their human rights recognized. Currently, they don't have the right to education. They are not in a safe environment unless they come to MindLeaps. And then you also have one of the most important people in the country, the US ambassador, who's there right next to them doing like the same move. And this moment, we can see how like the arts are the great equalizer. And at the same time, it's giving voice to these voiceless children. The US ambassador is understanding their plight. He's understanding what can be done to help these kids access education. So it's not just for everyone to kind of feel good in that moment. It also gets across the message to those who are empowered to make these changes, what needs to be done for the promotion of human rights. And now the fourth and the final pillar I'd like to kind of explore with you today is about creating access. And this gets kind of right to the heart of what MindLeaps does today, and I think is one of the most tangible ways that the arts can be used to promote human rights. So if we revisit this country I just referenced, Mauritania, this is one of the girls in our program in Mauritania. And you can see in the back here, one of the schools in Mauritania. Now, for those of you who know the country, you might not be surprised by some of this. So those of you who are new to learning a little bit about Mauritania, it's here in West Africa. And it's has a reputation for girls not going to school in the country. It's a deeply conservative society. Now it's important to note that is not factually correct. So it's not a kind of illegal for girls to go to school in Mauritania. And that's a misunderstanding of the country. However, in a lot of the traditional communities in Mauritania, there's not much of a history of it. There's not really a kind of a tradition of the girls going to school, or if there's a girl and a boy and only one can go to school because of financial means, usually the boy will go to school. Those patterns exist. And it is in Mauritania, working with a local partner organization called SOS Pairs Educateurs, that MindLeaps has a program. And as I mentioned, it really is in the desert. So this is just a little bit of ways from where MindLeaps operates its program here. And the children who come to the MindLeaps program in Nouakchott, Mauritania, this is where they live. So it's children who are able to walk to the community center. They're not going to school. They're also out of school kids, but they hear that there's like a free dance program that's happening at the local community center. And in order to encourage girls to participate in the program, especially the girls who want to do it, then what happens is the MindLeap staff go and they meet with the family. They meet with the mothers and the fathers, and we spend time talking to the family about why we would like the young girl of the family to join the program. Generally, this would be something that would be considered like a little bit unusual for girls to go join a local dance class in this society. And we invite the fathers or the older brothers or the uncles to come, and they can observe what's happening in the dance program. They can, kind of do their own vetting and make sure that they're comfortable with their young daughters engaged in these activities. And that level of communication is already starting the communication around human rights. Is that, actually these girls can also do this program, and let's open the door and see if they're allowed in. And then what happens is, through that community conversation, that community trust, and that transparency, girls join this dance program. This is one of our girls' dance program. And the concept behind the girls dancing is not just so girls have the chance to dance. It's really about creating a pathway for these girls to go back to school, to be enrolled in formal education. And the way that the MindLeaps program does that is by focusing on the mental state and the mental resiliency of the kids in our classes. So here, teamwork is one of the elements that we're working on in the MindLeaps dance program. This is an exercise given in dance class where the groups are formed and there's a task given to them, and then they create movement around that story to present back. In this picture here, we're working on self-esteem. So a series of movements are given, then the entire class goes into a circle, and one student is asked to come and lead the movements in the center. This is a young girl who's now leading her classmates in the series of movements. And again, although this is all done through the arts, this is done through dance and movement, these are the skills that we want to thrive in school and thrive in life: self-esteem, teamwork, grit, the ability to take on the task that's handed to you. And that really gets at the heart of the MindLeaps program. So in our standardized dance program, we specifically look at two cognitive skills. We look at the ability for these young children to be able to memorize sequences of information and to adapt to a foreign language. In many cases, these children are able to speak many languages, but they might not speak the language of formal instruction at school. But that ability to capture some of those words and those sentences will help them thrive when they go back to school. And then on the social emotional side, we know that developing these skills will help make them more able to stay in school, to survive the challenges that they'll face when they go back into school for the first time or re-enter after dropout, and ultimately reach graduation. Grit, self-esteem, creativity, teamwork, discipline, and core social emotional learning skills. And I think with COVID, we all learned that all of us need these social emotional learning skills. Although MindLeaps work is focused on bringing this through dance to at-risk youth, really everybody benefits from developing our social emotional learning skills. And that really came to light for us during the pandemic. And then, as Kim mentioned in her introduction, I often speak on the connection between arts-based programs and how we can quantify those results. I think a lot of times human rights and the arts are pushed to the sidelines because data and facts and statistics kind of override that messaging. But actually, that doesn't need to be the case. MindLeaps, which is not a large organization, developed a software application with Carnegie Mellon University, Drexel University, and engineers from the private sector to build a data application that actually quantifies those social emotional learning skills that we looked at into data points, into numbers. And our program produces analytics like this one here that show how dance can actually quantifiably change a social emotional learning state of a child. And what we do is we look at those 7 skills on a Likert scale from 1 to 7, and we measure how those skills change with each child in each lesson over time. So the number of lessons represented by the x-axis. And then when we look at graphs like this, we can make the case for why the arts are actually essential. They're essential to our well-being, and they're essential to opening up additional opportunities for often at-risk youth, but really anyone, because we can show that the social emotional learning state has actually changed because of this program. So I would really challenge those who say, the human rights, it's important, but we can't really touch it, or, the arts, they're a nice to have, but, we don't really know if they work. That's actually a false argument. We can prove the importance and the significance and the impact that these programs can have. And so if I finish the story that we started with, this idea of creating access, these girls that come to these dance classes in Mauritania then go back into school. And the way that we're able to have those conversations with their parents is we're able to show them data that say that these children have improved their social emotional learning, they've improved their cognitive skills, and they're going to thrive when they go into school. You will have these young girls in your family producing economic support for your family unit. Everyone will benefit from these girls going to school. And so those are the hallmarks of what I do now with MindLeaps, and happy that some of my team members are joining me. As Kim said, we have 103 staff around the world, and it's really the people living in these countries, working in these communities, that create this change every day at MindLeaps. We work in Rwanda, Uganda, and East Africa. We work in Mauritania and Guinea and West Africa. And we have small programs in North Macedonia and in New York City today. And so if we come back one more time to this idea of creating access, MindLeaps is an example of it, but there's so many organizations and individuals and umbrella organizations and associations pushing this forward. We can really see that creating access just increases the number of people who have these human rights and whose human rights are respected and upheld. It's absolutely an entry point to helping them access their human rights. And again, I do think it benefits the artist, it benefits the arts organization. It's a diplomatic tool. Okay? When we're now talking about how does the arts connect to education, or how does the arts connect to economic empowerment, now we're in diplomatic circles, okay, making the argument for these programs and why they're significant and why they can help solve some of the world's most integrated and complicated challenges. So in conclusion, I hope that I've made the case that both the artist and the art benefits from being connected to the platform of promoting human rights. And human rights really needs the arts, and they need the artist, and they need the messages that the arts create and formulate around the world to help make it possible for us to reach for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to be a truth in our world today. And some of the ways that happens is by raising awareness and using the arts as a form of protest, allowing it to give voice to the voiceless, and creating a tangible access for these at-risk communities to have opportunities. And for those of you who are educators and working with youth day in and day out, I really am a huge advocate of how we can connect the arts in their minds to these global issues and these global causes, so they can benefit both as the artists that they have, the passion for arts they have inside them, but also for the impact that they can have on the world. We're going to need all of them going forward. So let me pause here and say thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you, and I'll see if there's any questions that I can address and answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. This was amazing. We've got some really nice comments in the chat box praising your work and commenting on some of those photos. I want to take a couple of the questions that I'm seeing here. One is you had mentioned in Mauritania the program that or the work that you do there. And I know, I think it was during COVID that your students there and my students in Mesa,
Yeah.
Arizona connected via Zoom. Do you still do things like that? Because it was so amazing for my students to make that connection.
Oh, well, that's wonderful to hear. And actually, like one of our favorite stories from that time is that our Mauritanian team, our Mauritanian trainers and our students are always asking every year about Halloween. They were introduced to Halloween through this virtual relationship with American students. So now it's become a thing at MindLeaps in Mauritania, Halloween.
I love it.
um, we do them upon request. It's not a regular program that MindLeaps runs anymore, but we do have a lot of different connections to schools. And it's something that, because we've done it as an official program in the past, it's a kind of something that's very comfortable for our teams to run. So when educators reach out to us, and look for an opportunity to have either a one-off exchange, or sometimes it's more elaborate, sharing back and forth over the course of a semester, then it's something that we do. Also, sometimes it connects to the school sponsorship program, where a class wants to make one student able to access education in another country, and then understand kind of how that's changed the young person's life. So kind of different ways that those are running right now at MindLeaps, but it really is initiated by a request to the organization, and would welcome those enthusiastically. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, because I know we have a lot of teachers on who are probably thinking like, oh, that would be so interesting to do that. And I know when my students did it, I had a lot of students who were involved in the arts, whether it was dance or music or visual arts. And it was especially, there were some really interesting connections made with my musician students in that group, and your students. So yeah, so thank you. Another question came up. Sandy was asking about if you have looked into working with children who were affected by October 7th with the kibbutzim in Israel. And that led me to an even bigger question of like, how do you decide where to work?
Yeah. Thank you. Happy to answer kind of both of the pieces of that question. We haven't done any specific work in the Middle East, and it's been a constant question even before October 7th for MindLeaps. And then this is the answer to this is the answer to the larger question too. When we go into a new country, it's important that we have a local partner organization. Often MindLeaps develops the skills and the team members and the resources to then operate independently after an initial partnership. But to start in a new country, or even in a new community, we need a connection that's already inside the community, especially so we can access the right children that need the program. And that's surprisingly, that's been the obstacle for us in the Israel-Palestine conflict, is that we just really haven't made the right connection to a local partner. But we've been requested many times by funders, too, to be quite transparent about it, because there's such a need for it, and there needs to be new ideas, new diplomatic tools that are deployed to help this work. And the dance element is so powerful at building these relationships and helping with the emotional recovery. But we would need the right local partner really to make the connection and make the program go. So not sure who's out there, but if there's somebody who thinks that they have the right partner for us, we would again be really interested in having that conversation. And to the larger point, it's important to us to work in communities where there is children who are not accessing education on a full basis. So, I mean, we're working in New York City. These are not out of school students, but they're students who are likely to drop out without additional support. So one of the measures that we hold ourselves accountable to is whether or not our students graduate high school. So we want to also work in places where that's a challenge, right? So where kids are either not in school and need to figure out that path towards education, or are in school but might not make it without support. So that's an element that we look for. And then in general, there needs to be like a local partner or somebody to help introduce us to the community to build that community trust. And then ultimately there needs to be an interest in dance. In Mauritania was like one of the best test cases for us because it's not obvious that girls would join dance programs, but the interest was there. So as long as that, the interest may not be supportive, and that might be some of the advocacy work that we do there in the community, but kids actually have to be interested in dancing. So that's one of the things that makes a program successful for us. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, I think of students all over the world who may have an interest, whether it's the arts or whether it's sports, and maybe they don't love school so much, and so having
Exactly.
that connection with the school, I think, is really important. So, please, anybody, if you have questions, so I can make sure I get to them. But until then, I just wanted to mention too that I really like the way that you broke down the pillars, because it fits. I mean, it really fits the series that we're doing here, and I think it's a good reminder. I think a lot of times people, like you said, think of, oh, the arts. Well, it's nice to have them, but they're
Yeah.
not necessary. But look at all of the amazing work that you've done with dance and with the arts. And so again, I think I'm echoing what people are saying in the chat box, that this is just so inspirational and wonderful to hear, um, in the climate right now. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the platform and the opportunity, because it's exactly venues like this that help the entire cause. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Corey Williams, who from the fellowship, asked, you mentioned that graduating from high school was a measurement of success. Do you have the stats for that
Yeah.
to help? Okay.
Yeah. Overall, for all of MindLeaps programs, we have, after kids do the dance program, they're enrolled in school, the dropout rate is 1.5%. Now, one community or the other, it might be a little bit higher or lower. And the other caveat to the statistic is that some of our programs are longer running than others. So, for example, we've only been working in New York City since 2022. So, a lot of the kids are not at graduation rate yet. We're just still tracking if they're staying in school. And then other programs like Rwanda, we've had graduates every year. So the statistic is tracked for a longer period of time. So that's what we're tracking so far. And the 6 countries where we're operational right now, all countries track that.
Great. Is there a country or a group where you found um, more challenges for any reason, or or do you find that like I've always found that all kids are kids, right? But have you found particular challenges that you've had to overcome with any?
I think usually the challenges are on our side. I think I'm a believer in all kids are kids. And most kids love dance and music, if given the freedom to love it. So sometimes when we've had a lot of challenges, we haven't invested enough time in training the local team that will be the people who are running these dances day in and day out. The MindLeaps program is, I'm sure you're starting to understand, is quite standardized and data heavy. So it does come with a commitment and a consistency that has to be upheld for the program to have results. So we can't shorten that training process too much. That's been one of our learnings to make a program work in a new place. And then every once in a while, we've been affected by external factors. In our program in Guinea, which is one of our strongest programs right now, we had, I think, a 3-year hiatus when Ebola first broke out. So every once in a while, there's like a dip in programming, usually because of a global health crisis. Even where we're working, where there's like election violence or political tensions, normally a program can still happen as long as some precautions are taken. But the global health crises usually cause like a suspension for a particular time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you kept it going through COVID is amazing, so Great.
And that's like one of the times where it's needed the most, right? Is when social emotional learning levels are really going to drop unless you find a way to keep the hope that these kids who have fought so hard to get into school will still be able to go to school.
Exactly. Great point. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much. I think we've learned a lot from this. And again, we'll make connections again for everybody on. You'll get all the information. We made note of the links, and I'll send those out with the recording. We do have a follow-up survey as well that Colleen put in the chat box, if you wouldn't mind grabbing that right now before we walk away. And we appreciate you coming, and we hope we see you all for our last one on April 6th. And again, Rebecca, thank you so much, and we wish you the best with everything that MindLeaps does.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Take care, everybody.